Richard Petty received a message 2 days before Kyle Busch died. At the time, it made no sense. Kyle was still racing, still winning, still preparing for the next Sunday like he always had. Nothing about him looked finished. Then the news broke and the entire sport froze. For days, Richard Petty stayed silent. Fans demanded answers. Rumors spread everywhere. How does a driver who just celebrated in victory lane suddenly vanish forever? Why did Kyle keep pushing himself while reportedly battling serious physical problems behind the scenes? Then Petty finally spoke, and what he revealed changed how many people understood Kyle Busch's final days. Not as a single tragic moment, but as the end of a story that had been building for years. According to Petty, Kyle raced with an intensity very few drivers could survive mentally for long. Every race was personal. Every criticism pushed him harder. What the public saw on Sundays was only part of the picture. Behind it was a man carrying the weight of being NASCAR's most polarizing superstar, and never once slowing down, even when everything around him was telling him to stop. Kyle Busch was born on May 2nd, 1985 in Las Vegas, Nevada, into a family where racing was not a hobby, it was a way of life. His father was a mechanic who raced stock cars. His older brother, Kurt Busch, had his own long and decorated NASCAR career. Kyle was steering a go-kart at age 6 with his father operating the gas pedal. By age 10, he was already serving as crew chief on Kurt's dwarf car team, learning the mechanics of racing from the inside out. He made his NASCAR debut at 16, and what followed was unlike anything the sport had ever seen. He became the youngest driver to win both a pole and a race at the Cup level. Over a 24-year career, he accumulated 234 wins across NASCAR's 3 national series, the most in the organization's history by a margin that may never be touched. That total included 63 Cup Series wins, 9th all-time, 102 O'Reilly Auto Parts Series wins, the most ever by any driver, and 69 Craftsman Truck Series wins, also the most ever. He won the Cup Series Championship in 2015 and 2019, and the NASCAR Nationwide Series Championship in 2009. The Rowdy persona was real, and it was earned. Fans booed him loudly at tracks across America every weekend. Rivals clashed with him constantly, but the garage, the people who actually competed against him, respected what he brought every single Sunday. Richard Petty believed Kyle carried a constant need to prove himself no matter how many races he won. Even after becoming one of the most successful drivers in NASCAR history, Kyle still drove like someone trying to silence critics. That pressure never disappeared. The wins brought fame, but they also created expectations no normal driver could survive forever. As a team owner, his footprint was equally significant. Kyle Busch Motorsports, launched in 2010, became one of the most important driver development pipelines in the sport's history. In 2026, 27.2% of all Cup Series starts were made by former KBM drivers. In the previous season, an extraordinary 38.9% of all Cup Series wins belonged to KBM alumni. Names like William Byron, Christopher Bell, Daniel Suarez, Bubba Wallace, and Eric Jones, among many others. The final weeks of Kyle Busch's life now carry a weight that is almost impossible to process. His death certificate, obtained by The Athletic, confirmed that he had been dealing with bacterial pneumonia for days to weeks before he died. Most people around the sport had no idea how serious it had become. On May 10th, during the Cup Series race at Watkins Glen International, Busch was heard on team radio asking for a doctor to meet him after the race. Fox Sports reported he was fighting a sinus cold. Medical experts later noted that the intense G-forces and elevation changes on road courses like Watkins Glen can worsen respiratory infections significantly. Despite the illness, he finished 8th, his second top 10 finish in 3 races. 5 days later, on May 15th, he arrived at Dover Motor Speedway for the EcoSave 200 Truck Series race and put on one of the most dominant performances of his final season, leading 147 laps on his way to victory. In the post-race interview, Fox Sports' Amanda Busick asked him why these moments never get old. Because you never know when the last one is, you know? Busch answered, "Nobody in that victory lane understood what those words actually meant. They do now." He mentioned that the cough had been substantial. 2 days later, on May 17th, he competed in the Dover All-Star race, finishing 17th. It was the last race of his his career, though nobody knew it at the time. He was already preparing for the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway the following weekend. Then came May 20th. Busch arrived at a General Motors racing simulator facility in Concord, North Carolina, doing what he always did: preparing, working, refusing to stop. At 5:30 p.m., a 911 call was placed. According to the call obtained by USA Today, Busch was coughing up blood, overheating, and was found on the bathroom floor. An ambulance rushed him to a hospital in Charlotte. The following afternoon, at 4:37 p.m. on May 21st, Kyle Busch died. NASCAR, Richard Childress Racing, and the Busch family confirmed it in a joint statement roughly 1 hour later. To understand what killed Kyle Busch, it is necessary to understand what his death certificate actually documented. The chain of events was precise and devastating. Bacterial pneumonia, present for days to weeks, progressed into sepsis, which lasted 1 day. The sepsis then led to disseminated intravascular coagulation, a condition that causes abnormal clotting throughout the blood vessels of the body. That led to hemorrhagic shock caused by severe internal bleeding. The DIC and hemorrhagic shock lasted only hours. Dr. Ryan Maves, Chief of Critical Care Medicine at Wake Forest University, spoke to USA Today about the case. He was not involved in Busch's care, but he did not soften his assessment. Whatever he had was weird and rare, Maves said. For people in their 40s who are hospitalized with pneumonia, the mortality rate is roughly 1%. Factor in everyone who gets pneumonia at that age and never needs hospitalization, and the number drops even lower. It is very unusual, Maves said. Very, very unusual. What likely happened, according to Dr. Maves, is a process doctors call a bacterial superinfection. Busch almost certainly started with a viral respiratory infection. That virus damaged the lung tissue just enough to allow a far more dangerous secondary bacterial infection to take hold. People start with a viral pneumonia, and then you get a bacterial superinfection on top of that, Maves explained. Classically influenza, but some other viruses can do this as well. The bacteria capable of exploiting that window, certain staphylococcal and streptococcal strains, are among the most aggressive known to medicine. These can be very severe, and they can progress very quickly, Maves said. When I think of a young man dying of pneumonia after a preceding period of illness, that is the thing I think about a lot. Dr. Todd Rice, professor of medicine and director of the intensive care unit at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, explained the most haunting part of the timeline. The fact that Busch was using a racing simulator the day before he died and was scheduled to race the day after. Young, healthy people tolerate serious illness longer than most. Their bodies compensate, masking how severe things have become. Then, as Dr. Rice described it, they fall off the cliff. They are managing, barely, and then suddenly everything fails at once. Blood pressure drops, organs stop functioning, the body runs out of reserve. My bet is that he hadn't felt well for a few days, but he was in general doing okay, and his body was kind of compensating, Rice said. And then he kind of got to that point where his body couldn't compensate anymore, and everything kind of fell apart at once. Dr. George Carter of MUSC Health added important context. Young, healthy people who die of sepsis typically have an obvious underlying medical condition: cancer, organ disease, compromised immunity. Kyle Busch, by every public measure, had none of those. His death fell at the extreme and uncommon end of a disease that does not follow predictable rules. When the news broke on May 21st, the reaction across the sport was immediate and raw. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell said there was never any consideration of canceling the Coca-Cola 600. The only way you can honor his memory is to race, said one fan outside Charlotte Motor Speedway. Rowdy would have agreed. Denny Hamlin, who spent years as both teammate and rival to Busch at Joe Gibbs Racing, posted simply, "Absolutely cannot comprehend this news. We just need to think of his family during this time. We love you, KB." Dale Earnhardt Jr., whose rivalry with Busch stretched back to the 2008 Richmond crash that made Busch one of the most hated drivers in the sport, wrote one of the most personal tributes of all. "Kyle and I had a really challenging existence for many years, but we luckily took the time to figure out our differences, and that was something he instigated." Earnhardt had been planning to have Kyle race his late model at Wilkesboro that same summer. "He seemed extremely happy," Earnhardt wrote. "My heart is broken for the Busch family. I will never be able to make sense of this loss, but I am thankful that we had found a way to become friends." Kyle Larson said, "He was the bar we all measured ourselves against." William Byron said he was the best mentor you could ever have. Jimmy Johnson called him one of the most talented race car drivers I've ever shared a track with. The Coca-Cola 600 itself became something larger than a race. Before the green flag, the Busch family, Samantha, Brexton, Lennox, parents Tom and Gay, and brother Kurt, gathered on the infield beside the black number 8 painted on the grass. Kurt Busch laid white roses on the number. Every driver competing that day stood behind the family. When the Charlotte Fire Department pipe band played Amazing Grace, dry eyes were nearly impossible to find. Daniel Suarez won the rain-shortened race and could barely speak afterward. The very first thing that came to my mind was Kyle, Suarez told reporters. He didn't have to help me. He didn't have to help this Mexican kid that can barely speak English. He was already a legend of the sport, and he took the time every single week to help me. Away from the track, Kyle Busch was a different person than the one fans saw on Sundays. Fatherhood changed him. His son Brexton, now 11, had already begun racing and carried the same hunger his father was known for. His daughter Lennox, just 4, brought a softness out of Kyle that most fans never witnessed publicly. 2 days before everything changed, Kyle posted a birthday message for Brexton. He wrote about how proud he was of his son and said there was no limit to what the boy could accomplish. At the time, it looked like a routine family post. After May 21st, those words took on an entirely different meaning. After his death, Brexton changed his Instagram profile picture to a photograph of the two of them embracing after a race. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Richard Petty reportedly said that NASCAR may never see another driver like Kyle Busch again, not because of the championships alone, but because of the way Kyle attacked every race as though it was personal. 234 victories, 2 championships, a development pipeline that shaped nearly a third of the current Cup Series field, and 2 children who will grow up knowing their father was the greatest winner the sport has ever produced. He never got a farewell tour, no final lap around the track with the crowd on its feet, just one last victory lane at Dover, one last bow, and one last line that now echoes across everything. You take whatever you can get, man. You never know when the last one is going to be, so cherish them all. Trust me. NASCAR has since removed his name from the 2026 Cup Series standings. A quiet, respectful decision made out of empathy for those who would have to see it scroll past week after week. His car, renumbered to number 33, continues to race. The garage he shaped, the drivers he mentored, and the standard he set continue forward. The sport may have lost Kyle Busch, Richard Petty reportedly said, but it has not lost the fire he created inside future racers chasing greatness.